Your choice reveals a pattern you repeat when life grows dark inside you, and that is why this small moment matters more than it seems. The lighthouse that pulls you first can show the quiet way your feelings learn to freeze instead of flow. In a Jungian test, the image often speaks before logic does because the deeper self trusts symbols when words still hesitate. What looks like ice on stone can be held feeling, a paused signal, a guarded light waiting for safer weather. This is the heart of a Jung test, not whether you are drawn to beauty, but what in you still reaches for guidance in the dark. Do not think too long now. Just look at the 5 lighthouses, feel the first pull, and choose one from 1 to 5. Stay with the first impression, because it usually knows more than the part of you that tries to sound reasonable. Sometimes the mind arrives later with neat explanations, but the soul has already moved toward the symbol that feels familiar and strangely personal. Maybe you protect yourself by keeping things light, maybe by thinking instead of feeling, maybe by becoming harder, maybe by waiting at the edge of change. None of that means something is wrong with you. It only means your inner world found a way to stay safe, and now it may be asking for a softer way to live. As we move through this Jungian test, I will connect your choice to one clear practical step you can take in real life when the old pattern returns. That matters because insight becomes real only when it enters an ordinary moment, a silence, a decision, a conversation, a hand that almost pulls away. At first you may think you are only choosing a lighthouse, but by the end you will see that it is also showing where your feelings learn to wait for rescue. And only at the end will the meaning fully open, because the first image is only the door, and the deeper truth arrives when the symbol meets your own life. So stay close to what pulls you, even if you cannot explain it yet, because sometimes the part that chooses quickly is the part that has been waiting longest to be seen. What feels like curiosity may actually be recognition, and what feels like a simple preference may be your inner guidance trying to show you where fear still dresses itself as calm. Trust the lighthouse that finds you first and keep watching, because when the choice meets the practical step, you will understand not only what guides you in darkness, but what in you is ready to change. More gently now. Stay near. If you chose option 1, this often happens when something painful begins to rise in you, and another part of you quickly makes it smaller, lighter, easier to carry before it can fully enter the room. Stay with me, because this first lighthouse is rarely about having no feelings. It is usually about having feelings that move so fast into brightness, helpfulness, calmness, or distraction that even you can miss how much was there. The image says a great deal. A small lighthouse covered in a thin layer of frost still shines, still works, still looks gentle from a distance, and that is exactly the psychology of this pattern. In simple Jungian terms, the light is the part of you that stays warm, agreeable, responsive, and easy to be around, while the shadow carries the heavier weather that did not feel safe enough to show itself directly. Pay attention to this, because the gift in this pattern is real. You often know how to soften tension, keep things moving, and stop pain from swallowing the whole day. But the cost hides in quieter places. The feeling you skim does not disappear. It settles lower. It waits. It returns later as restlessness, sudden distance, strange tiredness, or a sadness that seems to come from nowhere. The simplified archetype here is the gentle avoider, the person who learned early that deep emotion could disturb love, unsettle the room, or make life harder for everyone around them. So instead of collapsing, you adapted. You became the one who stays pleasant, capable, and light on the surface. Here is why that matters. At some point, that adaptation may have stopped being only a strategy and started becoming an identity. You tell yourself this is just how you are. Easygoing, resilient. Fine, but stay with me a little longer, because sometimes what looks like resilience is actually speed, and sometimes what looks like peace is simply emotion that never got the chance to finish its sentence. You can see it in ordinary life in moments so small they almost disappear. Someone you care about says something sharp, forgets something important, or fails to notice what mattered to you. You feel the sting immediately. Then almost as quickly you smile a little, say it is nothing, Open your phone, change the topic, clean the kitchen, ask them how their day was. Do anything except remain with the exact place that hurt. Or maybe a friend asks what is wrong, and you give them the polished version, the version that protects them from the weight of your real answer, while the truer feeling stays lower inside you, still waiting to be witnessed. This is where Jung becomes useful in a very simple way. The shadow is not only the dark or ugly part of the self, it is also the unlived part, the feeling that got pushed out of sight because it seemed inconvenient, risky, too much, or too likely to change the atmosphere. And if you keep pushing it away, the pattern repeats. Not because you are weak, but because your system still believes lightness is the safest form of love. Here is the deeper twist. The lighthouse still shines, but the frost around it changes the quality of the light. It becomes softer, more filtered, less direct. That is what happens when you keep editing your feelings before you let yourself know them. You remain kind, but less reachable. You remain warm, but harder to truly touch. The answer is not to become dramatic or heavy. The answer is to become honest for long enough that the deeper feeling no longer has to hide under your brightness. Today, when you notice the first urge to laugh it off, stay useful, say you are fine, or move away from the feeling too quickly, stop and set a timer for 10 full minutes. Sit down, keep your phone away, and write one sentence that begins with, "I feel." Do not explain it. Do not defend it. Do not turn it into a story. Name the exact feeling underneath the performance, and stay with it until your body softens enough to remember that honesty is not danger, and depth does not make you harder to love. If you chose option 2, this usually appears when you can come very close to what you feel, name it with surprising accuracy, and still stop just before it becomes fully real inside you. Stay with me, because this pattern is subtle, and that is exactly why it repeats. The second lighthouse stands behind cloudy ice and sea mist, visible but blurred, and that image carries the whole inner conflict at once. Part of you wants truth, part of you wants distance. Desire says, "I want to know what this really means, I want to feel it, I want to stop pretending." Fear answers more quietly and often more cleverly. Fear says, "Understand it first, organize it, explain it, keep it tidy, keep it at a safe temperature." In simple Jungian language, the persona becomes thoughtful, composed, articulate, the part of you that can make sense of everything, while the shadow keeps holding the feeling that never got permission to arrive without being interpreted. Pay attention to this because the gift in this pattern is real. You're often perceptive, you read tone well, you notice what is beneath the surface. You can often explain the emotional atmosphere of a room better than the people creating it. But here is the tension. Understanding is not the same as contact. You may describe the feeling beautifully and still not let it touch your chest. You may know exactly why something hurt and still not admit that it did. That is why this lighthouse matters. Its light is still working, but the ice around it changes how the beam reaches the dark. It still guides, but through distance. It still shines, but indirectly. The mechanism here is not emptiness. It is emotional translation. Feeling turns into thought before it can become surrender. You see this in ordinary life in a scene that looks almost too small to matter. Someone you love sends a dry message after a difficult conversation. You read it twice. You notice the tension instantly. Instead of letting yourself feel the disappointment, the loneliness, or the fear that something has shifted, you begin explaining it. Maybe they are tired. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe I am reacting from the past. Maybe it means nothing. You make tea, you wash a plate, you replay the exchange with calm intelligence, and then comes the quiet mini-climax. Much later, when the room is dark and there is nothing left to do, the real feeling rises anyway. Not as a theory, but as a heaviness in the throat, a pressure in the chest, a sentence you wish had sounded different. That moment matters, because it shows that the shadow was never gone. It was only waiting behind the explanation. This is not weakness. It is a learned form of protection. At some point, feeling directly may have seemed too costly, too messy, too exposing. So the mind learned to step in first and create order before the heart could speak without a filter. That is intelligent, but it can also become lonely. The more elegant the explanation, the easier it is to believe you have already lived the feeling, when in truth, you have only walked around it with a lantern in your hand. Here is the deeper turn. You do not need less intelligence. You need one more degree of honesty inside it. The goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to let thought become a bridge instead of a wall. Once you notice that, the pattern loosens. The lighthouse stops guiding you away from the feeling and begins guiding you toward it. Today, set a timer for 15 minutes. Sit somewhere quiet without your phone and write only from sentences that begin with, "I feel." Each time you start explaining, return to the feeling itself. Not the reason, not the other person, not the history. Just the living emotion in plain words, until one true sentence appears that makes your body go still for a moment and reminds you that being honest with yourself is safer than staying forever just outside your own heart. If you chose 3, this often begins after a moment when trust felt expensive and showing pain seemed more dangerous than staying composed. That is the emotional cause beneath this choice. The third lighthouse stands inside thick ice, dark, steady, almost unshakable, and it mirrors a pattern that can look like strength while quietly functioning as avoidance. In Jungian terms, the persona learns to become reliable, efficient, and hard to read, because softness once felt too exposed to survive in the open. Stay with me, because this does not mean you feel less. It means you learn to turn feeling into control before it could become visible need. Here's an unexpected twist. What you call maturity may sometimes be protection wearing a very polished face. You see this pattern most clearly in ordinary scenes. At work you carry more than you should because being useful feels safer than admitting you are disappointed, tired, or affected. Someone changes the plan, forgets a promise, or leaves you holding the weight of something you did not create. You feel the sting at once, but the persona steps forward before the feeling can speak. You answer the message, you finish the task, you keep your voice calm, you make yourself even more dependable. On the outside, nothing dramatic happens. On the inside, a door closes. That is how the pattern repeats. The shadow takes the hurt underground, and from there it starts shaping your tone, your distance, your decisions, and the way you begin protecting yourself before anyone has even asked what is wrong. The same thing happens in relationships. Someone you care about says they will call, and they do not. When they finally reach out, they sound warm, casual, untouched. You want to say that it mattered, that the silence landed sharply, that some old part of you woke up the second you felt forgotten. Instead, you say it is fine. You stay even. You tell yourself you are being reasonable. Later, the room is quiet, and the real feeling returns in a different form. Not as tears, not as an outburst, but as coldness, shorter answers, less openness, less willingness to trust the next promise. See what happens next. The pain turns into discipline. The wound becomes distance, and because it all looks controlled, even you may miss that something in you is still reacting. That is why this option matters. The lighthouse is still guiding, but the ice around it changes the quality of the light. It shines through armor. The gift here is real. You know how to endure, you know how to keep going, you know how to fulfill what you say you will do. But the shadow grows when strength becomes the only identity you allow yourself to have, because then every softer truth starts feeling like weakness, and every honest need starts looking like a threat to the image that kept you safe. Pay attention to this, because the most painful part of the pattern is not just that you hide your hurt. It is that you often make decisions from that hidden hurt while calling them practical. You withdraw and call it clarity. You delay the truth and call it timing. You stop expecting much and call it realism. The mini-climax arrives when you realize that your reliability has sometimes become the place where you disappear from yourself. You keep commitments to everyone else, but the decisions that would expose what really matters to you remain suspended. You complete tasks, you meet deadlines, you stay composed. Yet the deeper commitment, the one that asks you to say this matters, this hurt, this is what I choose, stays frozen. Once you see that, the pattern becomes harder to ignore because the very quality that made you admirable has also kept you emotionally alone in the moments that needed honesty most. Today, choose one decision you have delayed because it requires truth. Write the next concrete step in one sentence. Set a timer for 15 minutes and complete that step before the day ends without changing it halfway through. Keep the promise. Not for the persona this time, but for the part of you that is ready for a form of strength that does not need to hide the truth in order to survive. If you chose 4, this often appears when control feels safer than surrender, because some part of you is afraid that if you finally let the truth move, you will lose something you are still trying to keep. Stay with me here, because this is not simple indecision. It is the tension between what you already know and what you are still trying not to disturb. The 4th lighthouse stands with ice beginning to melt from its windows, and that image matters. The light is there. The direction is there. The feeling is already trying to return, but something in you keeps holding the moment in suspension, as if a clear answer might break more than silence. In simple Jungian terms, the shadow here is the truth you already carry, but keep delaying. The limitation is not lack of insight. The limitation is fear of change. The persona looks careful, reasonable, thoughtful, patient. It says wait a little longer, think a little more, give it one more day, one more sign, one more conversation. But beneath that calm surface, there is often a very old fear that once you say yes or no, you will have to live without the comfort of maybe. Pay attention to this, because you practice this pattern more often than you usually let yourself notice. You may call it timing, you may call it maturity, you may call it being fair to everyone involved, but often it is the deeper self standing at the edge of a necessary shift, while another part tries to keep the old arrangement alive. That is why this option feels tense. It lives in the space between control and surrender. Control says, keep everything manageable. Surrender says, stop bargaining with what is already true. The fear hidden between them is rarely only about the decision itself. It is about what you might lose once the decision becomes real. Love, approval, stability, identity, hope. Even an illusion can feel painful to release when you have lived inside it for a long time. You can see this clearly in ordinary life. Imagine a relationship that has already changed, even if no one has fully admitted it. Someone asks where this is going, or whether you are still truly in it, and you answer gently but vaguely. You say you need time. You say things are complicated. You say you do not want to rush. Then you go on with the evening. You make dinner. You reply to a few messages. You fold clothes. Everything looks normal. But your body knows something your words are still delaying. The quiet feels heavier. The room feels smaller. The real strain is not coming from the question. It is coming from the effort of holding yourself between what you feel and what you are willing to say. The same thing can happen at work, with a move, with a friendship, with a habit you know no longer fits who you are. You keep the answer half open, because closing it would force reality to take shape. That is the mini-climax inside this choice. The hardest part is not that you do not know. The hardest part is that some deeper layer of you already knows enough and still keeps negotiating with the truth in the hope that clarity can arrive without loss. But clarity almost always asks for some form of surrender, not surrender as defeat, surrender as honesty, surrender as the moment you stop using delay to protect a version of yourself that cannot go where your life is trying to go. Once you see that, the pattern becomes very hard to unsee. You begin to notice how much energy it takes to remain undecided. You begin to feel how often waiting has become a way of freezing your own momentum. So do not reduce this choice to hesitation. It is more intimate than that. It is the pattern of someone who senses that a clean answer will change the emotional weather, and who fears that change enough to keep standing in the doorway. But the doorway is not home. It is only a pause. And every pause that lasts too long starts shaping the soul like a room with no windows. Today, choose one delayed situation that has been taking your energy, set a timer for 20 minutes, and give it one answer only, yes or no. Do not soften it. Do not reopen it after you decide. Let your body learn that a clear answer may shake you for a moment, but it also returns something delay quietly steals, which is self-trust. If you chose 5, something in you is already moving toward transformation, even if another part still calls it caution. Pay attention, because this choice is not about escape. It is about momentum, about breaking the mold that no longer fits the person you are becoming. Stay with me, because the 5th lighthouse appears when the old way of surviving has started to feel smaller than the life trying to rise inside you. In simple Jungian terms, this is close to individuation. the quiet courage to stop living as divided pieces and begin integrating what you have hidden, postponed, or pushed away. It is not about becoming someone else, but about allowing more of yourself to move in one direction at last. There is a reason this option feels sharp, because one part of you is tired of repeating the same route, the same silence, the same delay, while another part is still bargaining for one more safe day. That inner split matters. One side wants the known world with all its limits, because limits can feel safer than truth. The other side already knows that the frozen routine is not peace, only protection that has lasted too long. You see it in everyday life when you keep delaying a message, avoiding a conversation, or following the same morning pattern even after it has become dull and airless. You wake up already thinking about one decision you know you need to make, then tell yourself you will do it after work, then after dinner, then tomorrow, until the delay itself starts acting like a home. Then comes the quiet climax, the moment you realize the real fear is not only that change may fail, but that one honest move will make the old excuse impossible to keep. Once you act, even in a small way, you can no longer call yourself undecided and hide inside that unfinished version of your life. That is why this lighthouse carries so much momentum, because it marks the threshold where fear is still present, but no longer fully in charge. The strength here is not loud or theatrical. It is the strength of a person who finally understands that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move while fear is still walking beside them. Read this carefully, because individuation in everyday language is simply the brave work of letting your outer life and your inner truth stop pulling in opposite directions. This choice often reaches people who are tired of waiting for a perfect feeling before they begin, because a perfect feeling rarely comes first. The step that changes the weather is usually plain, visible, and irreversible. Today, choose the one conversation or decision you have delayed the longest. Write a message of no more than 20 words, and send it before the day ends. Do not soften it into maybe, do not hide it inside explanation, and do not wait for the mood to become perfect, because that old waiting pattern is the mold you are here to break. The instant you act, your nervous system learns something new. That movement can carry truth without destroying you, and that momentum is built by contact, not by fantasy. What looked like confusion begins to reveal itself as stored energy, and what looked like fear alone begins to show its hidden wish to become direction. That is the moment the beam of the lighthouse stops circling the same old waters and starts pointing toward a shore you have not trusted yourself to reach. Once that happens, even in a small way, you are no longer only imagining another life, you are participating in it, and that participation is what turns frozen hope into living courage. That is enough for now. One real step, one broken pattern, one inner light. No longer frozen at the edge of change, but moving ahead by your own hand at last, awake inside. What all 5 choices share is a quiet pattern that many people live without naming. In different ways, each lighthouse reveals avoidance, not because you are weak, and not because you do not care, but because some part of you learned that certain feelings were easier to postpone than to face directly. One person keeps things light, another explains everything, another becomes harder, another keeps waiting, and another drifts until change can no longer be postponed. Yet under all 5 choices, the movement is the same. A real feeling rises, fear answers it, and the psyche repeats an older strategy that once seemed safer than direct experience. That is why the symbolism matters, because a lighthouse is not only a structure in the dark, it is an image of guidance, warning, endurance, and the wish to stay oriented when visibility is low. Ice then becomes the symbol of emotional energy held still, protected by habit, suspended by fear, and mistaken for peace simply because it does not move. In simple Jungian language, the persona learns how to function in public, while the shadow carries what felt too painful, too messy, or too risky to bring into the light. The shadow is not a flaw, and the persona is not a lie. They are both attempts to survive, but survival becomes repetition when the old defense keeps answering new moments. That repeated movement is the common fear beneath every option, the fear of feeling too much, losing control, losing approval, losing a familiar identity, or finally having to change. This is why avoidance keeps returning, not because you are weak, but because some part of you still expects that honesty will cost more than distance. The sense of completion comes from seeing the pattern clearly enough to stop calling it fate and start recognizing it as a learned response that can now be interrupted. The new beginning comes from noticing that the same moment which once trapped you can become the first place where you choose differently and stay present long enough to feel what is real. The real test starts after this video, because the meaning of the symbol is never finished on the screen. It becomes true later, when life gives you one ordinary moment and the old reflex returns. That is the point where awareness stops being abstract and becomes a choice in the body. A pause before the message, a breath before the answer, a second of honesty before the usual escape. Integration does not mean becoming perfect. It means letting the feeling, the fear, and the wiser part of you exist in the same room without sending any of them away. It means your inner light no longer serving only protection, but also truth and direction. Today, when you notice yourself about to avoid, explain, postpone, harden, or drift, pause for 2 full minutes and choose one honest action before the day ends. Send the message, give the answer, keep the promise, name the feeling, or break the routine, but do not leave the moment untouched. That one act teaches the nervous system that presence can replace repetition, that fear can be felt without being obeyed, and that growth begins when your life and your deeper self stop pulling in opposite directions. Then the lighthouse is no longer only a picture you admired for a moment. It becomes a memory you can carry back into ordinary life, as a sign that darkness is not the end of guidance. It is the place where what once froze you now begins to guide you. Because the same psyche that created the defense also carries the instinct to heal through contact, courage, and truth. What feels finished here is only the blindness, not the journey. Because now you can see the pattern, and once you can see it, you can answer it with something new. And that is enough for tonight. One clear light, one true step, one new start inside now. If this touched something real in you, do not leave it here without answering it. Leave your number in the comments. Please enter your name. Like this. Subscribe. Watch the next test on your screen right now. Let this be simple and honest. You do not need perfect words, only a true one. If something in you felt seen, leave a small sign of that before you go. Stay with what opened in you for one more moment. Sometimes the quietest answer is the one that keeps the feeling alive long enough to become change. There is something powerful about not walking away from yourself too quickly. So let this ending be gentle but real. Leave your number in the comments. Please enter your name. Like this. Subscribe. Watch the next test on your screen right now. Let that be your way of saying that this reached you, that you recognize something, and that you are ready to keep following the light a little further. Do not disappear from your own insight now. Hold it for one more breath. The next test is not just another video. It is the next step in the story that already started inside you here. So stay close to this feeling, answer it while it is still warm, and move forward with it instead of leaving it behind. Because sometimes the smallest response is the first real movement after a long silence. Let this be that movement. Let it be quiet, clear, and yours.